series. Today we are joined by one of the renowned scholars of India currently working on Dalit and tribal studies, Dr. Indranil Acharya. He is professor in the Department of English, Vidyasagar University. He is more like an elder brother to me, and the relationship that we share is more of an informal nature, so it makes it a little unusual for me to introduce him in this very formal way, but this also is my pleasure because not every day you get the chance to introduce to people someone as renowned and as acclaimed as Indranil Acharya, whom I call Indranilda. So let me just read out a few things about him. As I said, that he is currently the professor in the Department of English, Vidyasagar University. He is known for his edited volumes, which have been published by national and international houses of repute. Listen to Flames, Texts and Readings from the Margins. This is one very major work done by him, edited book. Beyond a Sense of Belonging, Race, Class and Gender in the Poetry of Yeats and Eliot, another volume of which is the editor. He is also the editor of a very well-known journal of Dalit studies now, Janojati Darpan. Survival and other stories, Dalit Bangla fiction in translation is something that we are all proud of, and Indranilda is one of the editors of this huge volume, huge in terms of the impact it has, the influence and the importance it has in the field of translation. He has translated the languages of West Bengal. He is a co-editor there. Paschim Banger Bhasha, this is People's Linguistic Survey of India has published this. Towards Social Change, Essays on Dalit Literature, Many Colored Glass, a compulsory English textbook for view. So he also does that. And he is associated with various professional bodies, and he is a writer, editor who has been awarded by different well-known organizations. He is a visiting fellow in the University Grants Commission. He has got that in the year 2020. He has got an award on excellence in book production for Shriti Bilopir Pore, second prize in the regional journal category. He has got excellence in book production to Paschim Banger Bhasha, second prize. These both are from Federations of India Publishers. He has got a PALSI felicitation for Bhasha Research and by Bhasha Research and Publication Center. His area of interest and research area is chiefly literature of the marginalized, Dalit and tribal in translation, unwritten languages, oral literature and tribal culture, documentation, translation and analysis of endangered folk drama of West Bengal. Dr. Acharya is someone that is known across the whole of India for his scholarship, and we get to know that he is invited by various institutions, including someone like Jawaharlal Nehru University for discussion, for delivering lectures. One more thing that I would like to add before formally handing the mic over to Indranilda is that I have heard this from his students, and this is something that I haven't had the opportunity of experiencing myself, that Indranilda is a wonderful teacher in the classroom. And this is, we can say that this is becoming more of a rare quality these days when scholarship is, synthesized with expertise in teaching. So here's to Indranilda, a great scholar, a warm human being, and a wonderful, wonderful teacher. With these words, I'd like to formally introduce Indranil Acharya, Dr. Indranil Acharya, professor in the Department of Vidyasagar University. Indranil. Are you there?
Sir is there.
Okay.
Sir, you have kept your audio mute, yeah, now it's okay.
Yeah. Yes. Now, am I audible right now? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are very much.
Yeah. Now, should I be presenting now? I press anything, or is it okay? Has it started? Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So very good afternoon to all of you. I hope I am audible to all the participants for this online class. And I am also profoundly indebted to the principal of Midnapur College, Dr. Gopal Chandra Bera, for his kind initiative and for his vision towards building a platform where scholars, teachers, students and researchers from various institutions can join and can be benefited from this online lecture series. I also would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Tanmoy, Dr. Tanmoy Kundu of Midnapur College, English Department, Head of the Department of English. And of course, for Dr. Shoikat Sarkar, who is there, a faculty, I have a very special, thanks, and I have a very special, place in my heart for Shoikat, because both of us represent Purulia Ramakrishna Mission Vidyapith. Both of us had been, alumni of Purulia Ramakrishna Mission Vidyapith. So it's really very nice of Shoikat, the way he introduced me. I'm not yet, a very veteran, aged, profound scholar, but anyway, I'm trying in my own way to explore and understand an emerging area of study, which had already been established in a big way in many Indian universities and institutes. And I'm really proud to share with you that probably in West Bengal, we were the first people, people in the Department of English, Vidyasagar University, who began officially a UGC project under the Special Assistance Program, Departmental Research Support. Way back in 2009, we began working on the documentation, translation, and analysis of the oral and written literature of Dalit and tribal communities of West Bengal. So we did a pioneering work way back in 2009, and we were also the first department to have officially published the first anthology of Bangla Dalit stories in English translation, Survival and Other Stories, which Shoikat has just mentioned. And apart from that, we have also been able to publish a series of works, textbooks and works of criticism and other things, translations in the field of Dalit literature. We have also worked extensively in the field of Adivasi literature, that is tribal literature. Okay, and we have also brought out many volumes on the documentation, translation, and analysis of the indigenous languages, oral literature and tribal culture of not only West Bengal, but also the Eastern India as a whole. So in a way, we were among the first people in West Bengal who introduced Dalit literature in the postgraduate curriculum of our university. Not only that, we have also been able to introduce that in the undergraduate level since 2014-15. So Vidyasagar University is a university where Dalit literature is offered at both UG and PG levels for the last 6 to 7 years. Okay, and other universities have also come up in a big way, I admit. Okay, we have got many other departments who have followed suit, but definitely I feel that we were one among the very first practitioners in the domain of Dalit literature in West Bengal. Anyway, so after this brief introduction about what Vidyasagar University has done in the field of Dalit studies, I would like to switch over to the topic of my talk today, Dr. Ambedkar and the idea of untouchability in Indian society. And I presume, as I have been told by Tanmoy, that the primary audience of my lecture, of my talk, is definitely the students of this college, Midnapur College, a very illustrious and reputed college. So we are proud of this college. That is in Paschim Medinipur district. And I hope that students of the undergraduate and postgraduate levels are definitely listening to this talk. And for them, I know that in our Vidyasagar University syllabus, we have introduced a component. In fact, there is a course, an entire course in the 4th semester on Dalit literature. And I hope Midnapur College also offers that course. And I know, and I hope the students also know, that there is one unit which is on Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, and how Dr. Ambedkar led that non-violent satyagraha during the Chavadar tank movement, and how that Mahad satyagraha was also an important occasion for the historic speech of Dr. Ambedkar, where he inspired his fellow Dalit friends to come up and join in the social revolution, which was solely aimed at challenging the Brahminical order and establishing the principles of liberty, social justice, equality, and a strong sense of fraternity, especially amongst the ex-untouchable communities of India. So this speech definitely has a historic relevance, as it opened up a new discourse in the domain of Dalit movement. When we talk about Dalit movement as the mother of Dalit literature, we should also talk about the beginning of this Dalit movement, the preliminary stages of this movement. And when we talk about the preliminary stages of the movement, we have to talk about Dr. Ambedkar, the role of Dr. Ambedkar, and many other social revolutionaries, and how did they approach the idea of untouchability, how did they react to the practice of untouchability in Indian society, and in a way, how were they thinking about the ontology of untouchability, how did it develop in the Indian social context. And today, I think that a close reading of the text, Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, the close reading of the speech will definitely be done by the concerned teachers in the classroom, or had already been done by the teachers in the classroom. Okay, so I'm not going into the details of the text, but I would like to talk about the idea of this caste in Indian society, how the system of caste developed in Indian society, and how the idea of untouchability became a practice in the Indian caste system. So let us have a look today at the growth and evolution of the Indian caste system, and how did it promote the notion of untouchability. Now, if you look at this, the second slide, you find that the caste became a fixed category, and it is governed by the rules of endogamy, and as you know that Dr. Ambedkar repeatedly says in that speech at Mahad, that how it was impossible for the other castes to help the untouchables to change the social order and remove the practice of untouchability, because each and every caste was interested in maintaining the status quo, and how there was an inherent fear in each and every caste regarding the doctrine of overreaching, or the ideas of pollution and purity, and in a way how there was an anxiety of losing the present identity. So caste was developed as a fixed category, and caste became an extreme form of social stratification. And this stratification was artificially imposed and maintained by the upper castes for their vested interests over many centuries. In fact, if you look at the two views of the origin of the caste system, you would find that the first one is the Western view, or the historian's view, and the second one is the Brahminical view, which is more of a kind of mythological, scriptural interpretation of the origin of caste system. Now, if we look at the first type, the first interpretation, we find that is the Aryan invasion theory. And how did the Aryans moved from the Middle East How did they settle in Punjab and then move to the Gangetic plains of India, especially the northern part of India, and how did they enslave the indigenous people? So this is something which we, pardon, there is one typo. Anyway, how did they enslave the indigenous people? So this was the most acceptable theory, the Aryan invasion theory, up to a point of time. But let me tell you, and I hope you know, that Dr. Ambedkar did not subscribe to this Aryan invasion theory. Dr. Ambedkar felt, and he had already written some dissertations on it, that regarding the origin of the Aryans, and he thought, he considered that the Aryans were very much, people of the Indian subcontinent. Okay, and he also felt that there was actually no idea of the Shudras as the insiders or the autochthons, and the Aryans as the invaders. Rather, according to Dr. Ambedkar, the Shudras were at one point of time the Kshatriyas, okay, who were later degraded, okay, due to various reasons. Okay, but this is one theory which we find at the beginning, the Aryan invasion theory and the enslavement of the indigenous people. And the second theory, if you look at it, that deals with the mythological, religious theory. And there we find there is a reference to the Rig Veda and one part of Rig Veda, okay, which is known as the Purusha Sukta. Okay, and this Purusha Sukta is considered to be the root of this classification, this social hierarchy, this social division, okay, which we find in a much complicated form at a later stage. In fact, in the pre-Aryan, pre-Vedic period, if we look at the history, we find there was no caste system in India. There was no caste system in India. And again, if you go back to the Indus Valley civilization, okay, which is roughly from 2500 to 1700 BCE, okay, yeah, and you would find that many scholars are of the opinion that it was, Dravidian by nature. And in a way, it was urban civilization, okay, whereas the Aryans had non-urban, primitive kind of culture. So according to many indigenous scholars, the Indus Valley civilization, which was thought to be a Dravidian civilization, okay, was definitely superior to the Aryan civilization. And in the Indus Valley civilization, however, the tribals and the menials were pushed out of the city, and there was also the existence of the slave society. Okay, but at the same time, there was no caste system. We don't find it in the Indus Valley civilization. And if we look at the role of the Aryans then, going by the first theory, the Aryan invasion theory, I would advise the students to read one book, to consult one book by Gail Ombed. Okay, I have given the title here, Understanding Caste, from Buddha to Ambedkar and beyond. So you would be able to understand how the caste system came into being in the Indian subcontinent and how it developed, how it was complicated, and how it created the untouchables and in a way made it very problematic for the Indian social system. The Aryans, once again, going by the first theory, were the nomadic tribal groups from the middle of Asia to Punjab, and they cruelly extirpated the Aborigines. We know that there are various descriptions like the dark-skinned, the Shus, the Rakshasas, and others. Okay, although in a way, Dr. Ambedkar says that the Shus and Rakshasas, okay, were also part of this Aryan tribal network. Okay, so it was not that the Aryans and the Shus were two different people, okay, people belonging to different races, not like that. And they established their kingdom in the Gangetic plains. Another reference I have given here, the book by Swami Dharmatirtha, History of Hindu Imperialism. This book is also important to chart historically the evolution of the caste system and the development of untouchability. and the role of the Aryans and their conflict with the Dravidians, and how the entire social engineering was conducted since the ancient period. Now, decline of Indus Valley, if you look at that, the Indus Valley civilization was around 1800 BC. Okay, around 1800 BC, and the rise of the Rig Vedic culture, the Sanskritized culture, which the upper caste Brahminical scholars often refer to. Okay, the rise of the Rig Vedic culture was also around that 1800 BCE, and it continued till say roughly 900 BCE. So you find that the decline of the Indus Valley civilization almost overlapped with the rise of the Rig Vedic culture. And in the Vedic times, as I have already mentioned, we find the social divisions, not strictly the caste divisions, but there was definitely social divisions based on the apportionment of labor. Okay, and there we find initially there were three different castes: the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, the three major social divisions. And later Shudras were added to it, and this Chaturvarna you will find is metaphorically stated in the Purusha Sukta. And this metaphorical presentation of Chaturvarna system, according to many indigenous scholars, is actually the beginning of the kind of hierarchy, the social stratification, which we find being practiced at a later stage in Indian society. And if you look at that description, you find that from the creator's mouth, Brahma, Brahmins emanated. From the shoulders of the creator, Kshatriyas emerged. From the thighs of the creator, the Vaishyas, they emerged. And finally, the feet of the creator were reserved for the rise of the Shudras. Rise of the Shudras. And later, if you read Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, you would find that there was no place initially in this hierarchy for the Ati Shudras. They were outside the purview of such considerations. That was a later development. Particularly if you look at Aitareya Brahmin, you would find that there is a fixed caste role. Division of 4 varnas, and that was mainly occupational. And you would find that Mahatma Gandhi subscribed to this view of the fixed caste roles, division of the 4 varnas, mainly on the basis of occupation. But in the Vedic times, it was hierarchically arranged. The nature of occupation was hierarchically arranged, and there was definitely a kind of social hierarchy that created a kind of mechanism of superiority and inferiority in society. I would also like to refer to 2 more books. I have given the references. One is by the famous historian D.D. Kosambi, The Culture and Civilization of Ancient India in Historical Outline. And the second one is by the American sociologist Harold Gould. The title is The Hindu Caste System. This is a very important book, The Hindu Caste System, which you can consult, and you will find an outsider's view, a very critical view of the rise and development of Hindu caste system. In fact, Gould observes that India maintained social hierarchy on a pollution scale. The major operating discourse was one of pollution and purity. Religious and economic functions were protected, especially for the upper caste, especially for the caste Hindus. I would also like to refer to another book by the late Dalit leader, an intellectual, politician, and a Dalit ideologue, Jagjeevan Ram, Babu Jagjeevan Ram. The title of his book, Caste Challenges in India. Read this book, because this also opens up the whole discourse of the rise and development of Dalitism the rise and development of the notion of untouchability, and how was it related to the caste system, and how was it made a fixed category for the so-called lowest caste of people of Indian society. The scholar conscious Aryans, a politically divided Indian society, to maintain what is very important, to maintain purity of their blood, this purity of their blood, which was also maintained strictly through endogamy, strictly through intra-marriage. And that is why if you look at Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, you would find that he is repeatedly referring to the need of introducing intermarriage or inter-caste marriage, because that is the ultimate solution to annihilate and destroy this evil caste system, this hierarchized caste system. The upper caste, and there was this popular view which was established and confirmed in the social domain, that the upper caste descended from the Aryans and the lower castes, Shudras and Ati Shudras, descended from the dark-skinned non-Aryans. Okay. So in this way, we find that today the social scientists, as I've already mentioned, even Dr. Ambedkar, don't accept the Aryan theory to explain the caste system. Okay. He believed that the caste was not a racial division, but a division of different communities by Brahmins into high and low to retain the power. So there was an anxiety of losing power to the greater number of strong and able-bodied, the so-called Dalit communities. So in order to retain power, it was a deliberate division of communities on the basis of their birth, so as to fix their caste-based role and identity, and thereby to stop any chance of emancipation, any chance of transcendence, any scope of liberation. Next slide. Look here, the consolidation of caste society and untouchability. In fact, the Chaturvarna order and Indian caste system were established firmly during this 500 BCE to 500 CE. It was happening over a period of almost 1000 years. The Shudras became the slaves without any citizenship rights. Shudras were used as slaves. In the Varna scheme of Vedas, there was no mention of untouchables, no mention of them. It was a much later development. But Chandalas were there, Nishadas were there. You would find in Mahabharata, you would find reference to Ekalabhya. Ekalabhya belonged to the Nishadas. You would also find to Chandalas and other, the outcast groups and other excluded groups in Vedic literature. And later what happened, that these excluded groups were degraded to untouchables. They were degraded to untouchables, and there was the creation of a very large community of people who were made disabled on the basis of their economic, social, and civil liberties. So when we study untouchability in the context of Indian caste system, we have to study different forms of economic, social, and civil disabilities too. Look at the next slide. The caste society and untouchability, how the practice of untouchability, and this one is important because I found this information in the book on Dalit literature and criticism by Professor Rajkumar of Delhi University, that the practice of untouchability began during the Brahmin king Pushyamitra Sunga's rule, which was 187 BCE onwards. It began around that point of time. In fact, Pushyamitra was the minister of a Shudra king, and later he conspired against the Shudra king and killed him, And fearing a Shudra revolt, he asked Manu, a Brahmin Pandit. So we find reference to Manu in connection with Pushyamitra Sunga, a Brahmin Pandit, to codify the inhuman and unethical laws against the Shudras, abusing religious power. So Manu abused his power. Pushyamitra Sunga inspired him to abuse religion and thereby to create a very repressive kind of code, a code text that would deprive and harass the Shudras. And this text is known as Manu Shastra or Manu Smriti. Manu Smriti, which was later on propagated through other Dharma Shastras. Okay. So remember that Dr. Ambedkar considered this Manu Smriti as the most important text, religious text, responsible for the pain and suffering of the untouchable communities over many centuries. And that is why, on 25th December 1927, Dr. Ambedkar, along with a large number of his followers, burnt copies of Manu Smriti publicly, burnt Manu Smriti. And this 25th December is still observed by the Dalit people as Manu Smriti Dahan Din, Manu Smriti Burning Day, 25th December. So this is important because Manu Smriti codified a large number of taboos by which the Shudras and later on by extension the Ati Shudras were deliberately left out of the other privileges which the caste Hindus enjoyed. So they were excluded from other privileges. And that tradition continued for a long period of time. And if we move on to the early 20th century, we find that the untouchables had no access to the public facilities. For example, the sources of water, the wells, the rivers, roads, schools, and markets. If you read a very memorable poem, it is included in an anthology entitled The Exercise of Freedom, an introduction to Dalit writing, edited by K. Satyanarayana and Suji Tharu. There you will find there is a brilliant poem entitled Water by Chalapalli Swarupa Rani. If you read the poem Water, you will find how water was the major marker of the rift between the touchables and the untouchables. How water became a very powerful metaphor for the exclusion and discrimination against the untouchables. How they were denied access to the very source of life, water as the symbol of life. Roads, schools, and markets everywhere. Untouchables were forced to wear pots round their necks to collect their saliva, and they had to tie a broom behind to sweep away their footprints. You would find this brilliantly described in a poem by Arjun Dangle, a Dalit poem entitled Revolution by Arjun Dangle, where you will find it is included in that anthology of Dalit literature edited by Mulk Raj Anand and Eleanor Zeliot. If you read the poem, you will find how degraded the untouchables were and how they were made to be obnoxious creatures. How were they humiliated? The entire discourse of humiliation, which we find in the life of the Dalits, of the untouchables. The untouchables were viewed as polluting and polluted. So this was the fate of many untouchable communities, and this was how it developed. The entire discourse of untouchability developed, and how the Manusmriti or Manu Shastra in a way hardened and sealed the fate of the untouchable communities, of the Shudras first and then the Ati Shudras, and how the entire discourse made it impossible for the untouchables to have any ascendancy in the social ladder, in the social hierarchy. But at the same time, okay, we should also know about different protest movements against the caste system, okay, in the Indian subcontinent. So if we look at the protest traditions against caste system, it will be easier for us to place Dr. Ambedkar in this glorious tradition of protest, of social awareness, okay, and of very conscientious people who had been vocal and vociferous against this evil practice over the last many centuries. The first one, Lokayata. I have given the example of the Charvakas, okay, the philosophers, okay, the members of the hedonistic school, 6th century BC, okay, who revolted against the idea of slavery. The idea of slavery, because the idea of slavery had already developed by that time. Okay, if we go by the system, okay, if we go by the Aryan system, we find the Shudras had already been employed as slaves. So Charvakas were the first philosophers who revolted against the system of slavery. And later, Jainism and Buddhism, the two Protestant forms of Hinduism, the two breakaway groups of Hinduism, okay, continued to protest against the evil caste system of Hinduism. In fact, Gautam Buddha was the first social revolutionary. Unfortunately, he was later appropriated by Hinduism, by the canons of Hinduism as an avatar of Vishnu. But still, Buddha remains a symbol of emancipation, of social equality, social justice, and Buddha remains an inspiration for the true social revolution. And that is why, just a few months before his death, Dr. Ambedkar, okay, converted to Buddhism, and along with him, okay, nearly 500,000 people were also converted to Buddhism. Okay, so that was a major phenomenon, and that was a realization of Dr. Ambedkar. And before that, he had been visiting many Buddhist conferences in Colombo, okay, in Burma, okay, in also Nepal, Kathmandu. He joined many conferences. And he also wrote a brilliant book, authored a brilliant book on Buddha, okay, and his dharma. Okay, so there we find how Buddha became probably the most powerful symbol of social revolution and the greatest hope of the untouchables for emancipation, for freedom. Now, at the same time, we find that if we look at the history of India, particularly in between, say, the 10th century and the 16th or 17th century, before the advent of the British, okay, before the colonial period, we find that Adi Sankaracharya, 788 CE, Ramanujacharya, 12th CE, and Madhvacharya, okay, all three of them strengthened the practice of Brahminism. Particularly in South India, there had been a very strong imposition of the Brahminical rites and rituals. There had been a revival of the Brahminical way of life, and it was quite oppressive for the other people especially of the so-called lower castes. And this repression continued for many centuries. And that is why we find that many of the social revolutions, especially anti-caste revolutions, were undertaken in the southern provinces of India because of a long history of Brahminical rule and Brahminical high-handedness, which ultimately, inspired people to revolt against the system spontaneously. And another very important movement, anti-caste movement, is the Bhakti movement. All of us know that from 8th to 18th century, it's continued for almost 1000 years. And we know how there were many low caste saints who inspired the people of the lower castes to enroll themselves to the practice of religion, and how they made religion and access to religion democratic for people from all walks of life, and how there was a kind of mass inclusion. There was a sense of inclusiveness in their religious philosophy. Okay, you look at them, Namdev was a tailor, Chokha Mela was a mahad, okay, belonged to the untouchable caste. Kabir was a weaver, Raidas was also a cobbler, okay, a very low caste. Okay, and Sena was a barber, Tukaram belonged to the Kunbi caste. Okay. And in Bengal, we find how Chaitanya, despite belonging to the upper caste, okay, created a kind of social revolution by which, people of the lower castes also joined and practiced, the basic tenets of religious rites, and how they were incorporated into the mainstream of religion. So caste and religion as two institutions became very important during the Bhakti movement. And even if we look at the caste system and Islam, we find that roughly from 800 to 1600 CE, we find that the Muslim rulers, who began their rule in the Indian subcontinent, when we find the attack of the first Muslim ruler, and gradually the evolution of the Sultanate, and later on the Mughal rule. Okay, if we look at the gradual advent and rule of the Muslim rulers, we find generally they didn't interfere with the majority Hindu caste society. There were many instances of forcible conversions of caste Hindus to Islam. Okay, and that also was another reason why the Hindus also became more orthodox during this period of time. A kind of self-preservation instinct was there, and so out of that, the rules and regulations were made even more stringent. And we find that there were large-scale, en masse conversion to Islam, which happened. Over two major examples we can cite. One happened in Malabar, another one happened in Chittagong. And so untouchables joined Islam. Untouchables who were excluded and left out by the mainstream caste Hindu society decided to join Islam. But once again, there was also a sense of antagonism even in the highly placed Muslims regarding the untouchables. Okay, like the majority caste Hindus, because this was a mindset which invaded all the religions. Because if you read the autobiographical text, if you read the autobiographical text of Bama, if you read Karukku, you will find how even in Christianity there was a great disparaging attitude. There was great contempt for people from Dalit society, from the untouchable societies. Okay, and how Bama had to suffer an extreme humiliation inside the Christian church as a nun. Okay, and some scholars also feel, there is another opinion also, that Islam granted relative equality to all, especially to the newly converted untouchables. And every follower of the Prophet, there was a chance that every follower of the Prophet, to rise to any position. So there was a kind of democratic environment where equal chances were provided. And I would like to refer to one, two references, two books. One is by R.C. Jiloha, The Native Indian in Search of Identity, and the second one is an edited volume by Imtiaz Ahmed, Caste and Social Stratification Among Muslims in India. I would advise the students to consult these books, and if possible to read a few articles in order to understand the dynamics of conversion during the Islamic rule, and how the untouchables were incorporated into the Islamic order, and what were the reactions, and what were the fallouts of such conversions, and how did it continue during the British rule. British rule, that is late 18th century. If we go by 1757, the Battle of Plassey, as a kind of watershed. We find that in the 18th century, late 18th century, with the advent of the British East India Company, we find that the old upper caste hierarchies still continued because the British didn't interfere in the caste-based equations of the Indian society at the beginning. In fact, in the 19th century, we find with the advent of many Christian missionaries, especially from the Scandinavian countries, we find that the untouchable life was changed to a large extent. Okay, with the introduction of schools and hospitals and many other modern facilities in the remote heartland of the Indian provinces, we find for the first time how there was a perceptible change in the life of the untouchables. Okay, we can specially refer to Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, and the entire Northeast, where the missionaries had left their footprint to a large extent, and it was a very strong influence, particularly in the Northeast. And they converted the untouchables, and they also stopped them eating carrion and drinking alcohol, and re-access the tabooed jobs they could re-access. They were educated. So the people of the untouchable communities could now join the earlier tabooed jobs like school teaching and other professions. And in a way, I would also like to mention in this connection two more books, very important books. One is by Mark Galanter, Competing Equalities, Law and the Backward Classes in India, how the British formulated different laws in connection with the backward classes in India, and how they attempted to create an environment of equal access, and how that was an impediment that created a lot of problems in the upper caste Hindu society, and how the implementation of the promulgated laws and codes created a huge problem in the Indian society. So all these issues have been discussed in quite great detail in this book. Another one is by Duncan B. Forrester, Caste and Christianity, Attitudes and Policies on Caste of Anglo-Saxon Protestant Missions in India. Okay, so Anglo-Saxon Protestant missions, they played an important role in improving the standard of life of the former untouchable communities, and they spread the Christianity in the remote corners of the Indian subcontinent. But at the same time, they also brought the fresh lease of modernity, the ambience of modern values in the deepest recesses, the darkest recesses of the Indian subcontinent. So today we know the condition. Many churches are threatened by the ultra-Hindu wings. There is also a kind of reconversion, and the entire problem of caste and conversion is a real experience, especially for the lower caste people and especially for the untouchable castes, because they are the most vulnerable, they are the weakest sections of the Indian society, and they had been made the target for any religious indoctrination, for any religious conversion, and they were used as the specimens for experiments in this way. Now the social reform movements, if we look at that, if you look at the history of the social reform movements, you will find that Dr. Ambedkar enjoyed a glorious position in a long chain of legacy, where there had been regular attempts at reforming the Indian society, and how there had been regular protests against the caste-based hierarchized social system of the Indian subcontinent, and how there had been different reformers emerging in different ages with their own views and opinions regarding untouchability and the evils of the Indian caste system. Okay, you can see Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who established Brahmo Samaj in 1828, a movement which created a new renaissance in Bengal, but it was confined mostly to Bengal. Then the Arya Samaj movement in 1857, that was established by Dayanand Saraswati, who opposed caste restrictions and who also advocated the abolition of untouchability. And there was the Shuddhi movement. You all know that, students of history, how he gave sacred thread to the untouchables and how there was an attempt to uplift them socially and culturally. And Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, we have to refer to him as well as part of the Bengal Renaissance movement, who hated the practice of untouchability. In fact, cleaned Bhangi's courtyard himself with his hair, and how he accepted the Shudra queen, Rani Rashmoni's request to be the priest at Dakshineshwar Kali temple. So in that age, in the late 19th century, Sri Ramakrishna was a symbol of the equality, social equality, a practitioner of social equality, and a believer in the universal access of all kinds of people to the practice of religious rites and rituals. So, and Swami Vivekananda, we all know how strongly he denounced untouchability and how he considered it to be the cause of India's downfall. In fact, if you read Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad, you would find at different points of time, Dr. Ambedkar was exactly echoing the views of Swami Vivekananda. Dr. Ambedkar says that if we are divided within, if there is practice of untouchability in Hindu society, then we will be a divided society, and a divided society is a weak society, and it will be the cause of our downfall. We won't be able to compete with the best nations of the world, with the most modern societies of the world. We will always be described as a retrogressive society. So if you look at the views of Dr. Ambedkar, you will definitely feel that there is a resonance which we heard earlier in Vivekananda's vision of the new India, where there will be an inevitable rise of the lower caste people. And role of Gandhi here should also be discussed briefly, because when we talk about untouchability, the idea of untouchability in Indian society, Gandhi provides a major approach. Gandhi provides a major take on this issue. He separated untouchability from the caste system, but Gandhi didn't criticize the practice of children following the father's profession. Also, how he in a way supported the strict division of labor of Hindu society, and how he believed that the Shudras and Atishudras should also be following their father's profession. And it contradicts the democratic idea of caste mobility. So Gandhi, in a way, did not endorse the idea of caste mobility. Ram Mohan to Gandhi, in a way, we find there is a long chain of upper caste initiatives. But if we look at the initiatives of the anti-Brahmin, the un-Brahmin, the non-Brahmins, and also the in a way the so-called lower caste leaders of this movement against untouchability, we find that the first one in this glorious line is Narayana Guru. Narayana Guru, who emerged from Kerala in late 19th century, and he fought for the untouchable Ijhabas, the toddy tapers. And Narayana Guru came up with that slogan, one religion, one caste, one God. And later you would find in Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad also how he advocates the idea of one caste only, one caste. And he was later influenced, Narayana Guru, by the Hindu idea of prohibition, and he stopped taking meat and liquor, advised his followers not to take meat and liquor. And the next one is E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, popularly known as Periyar. Periyar was a major, anti-caste figure figure in the anti-caste movement from Tamil Nadu, and he started that self-respect movement in 1925. And how there was a revival of the Dravidian culture, the Dravidian Asmita, okay, and how he demanded how that the non-Brahmins, there should be a country for the non-Brahmins or the Dravidians. And in 1944, the Dravida Kajakam party was formed. The Dravida Munnetra Kajagam, later the name was given. And so there was definitely a regional move in his philosophy, but that regional move was solely linked to the interest of the lower caste people, especially for the untouchables. And along with Jyotiba Rao Phule, we find Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. They were the two major figures of the modern Indian face, the struggle against untouchability, modern Indian icons of the revolt against the hierarchized caste system. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar was the champion of social liberation, economic emancipation, and political advancement of the downtrodden. But he envisioned a radical reconstruction of Indian society. Okay, repeatedly, you would find him saying in that speech that intermarriage should be introduced and Indian caste system should be abolished. Okay, and how he supported the annihilation of caste system, because that was the only way to achieve social equality, social justice. And in 1927, you know how he established the Samaj Samata Sangha to encourage intercaste marriage. And he also started the Marathi fortnightly Bahishkrit Bharat for the Dalits. And in 1930, before that in 1927, there was the Chabadar tank Satyagraha. In 1930, there was another temple entry Satyagraha movement at Kalaram Mandir at Nasik. Okay, and there was a huge gathering of the untouchables and how they made a great procession to enter the temple. But however, they were in a way prevented by the upper caste people. But Dr. Ambedkar also created the Samata Sainik Dal, and he offered opportunities for the untouchables to rise up the social ladder, because according to Ambedkar, political power was necessary. Political power was necessary, and you know that how Dr. Ambedkar wanted or demanded a separate electorate for the marginalized people, for the depressed classes, and his slogan was "Be a ruling race." Okay, there was another very popular slogan of "Unite, Educate, and Agitate." But he believed that that was not going to be perhaps non-violent. Okay, perhaps that social revolution is going to be a violent process, because the caste Hindus, the upper castes, okay, would never allow the position, would never give away their place of power and privilege to the Dalits, to the untouchables. But he couldn't achieve due to the steep opposition of Congress. Okay, and you know how Dr. Ambedkar described Congress as a full-blooded and blue-blooded Hindu body. So there was definitely a note of serious difference with the upper caste Hindu Congress leaders. And you know that both of them, the Dalits and Muslims, demanded separate electorates so that they are not overshadowed by the Hindu nationalists. And in fact, in the constitution itself, Dr. Ambedkar embedded the ideas of equality and social justice. Okay. But his dream remained unrealized. He was very dismayed, very disappointed, because he was not allowed to act in the way he dreamt of acting. And in a way, how the 1932 Pune Pact finally forced Dr. Ambedkar to develop an attitude of compromise. How the pact signed between Dr. Ambedkar and Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya ultimately forced them to give up their demand for a separate electorate. Anyway, that's a different story, but he was disgruntled and he was not happy with the political developments and changes immediately after the independence of India. and he seriously thought about changing his religious faith, and finally he decided to embrace Buddhism after his attendance of various Buddhist conferences in different countries. And how we know, along with Dr. Ambedkar, there were other non-Brahmin leaders who also led the movements, the protests against untouchability and the evils of Indian caste system in different provinces of India. Harichand Rai Chand, we know that the leaders of the Matua religious sect, Harichand Biswas from 1812 to 1877, Bhima Bhoi 1855 to 1894, Ayothi Thas from Tamil Nadu, Swami Achyutanand from Uttar Pradesh, Manguram Mugowalia from UP, and Ayan Kali. Ayan Kali was a very spirited Malayalam Dalit leader, and we have included an excerpt from his life in our edited volume, Listen to the Flames, texts and readings from the margins. If you follow that edited volume, you will find there is an excerpt from the biography of Ayan Kali, and you will be surprised to know how this leader, how this great Dalit leader could in a way mobilize and motivate thousands of untouchable comrades to unite against the high-handedness and cruelty of the Malayalam Brahminical society, and how he protested against them. He also resisted them physically, and violence was replied through counter violence, and how they matched with the superior armed Hindu people, how they faced them, the Hindu militia. And you would find many very disturbing incidents in this biography, and still you would find how resilient and gutsy this Malayalam Dalit leader had been, and how gloriously he established the rights of the ex-untouchables in Malayalam society, and how he was elected to also the assembly, and how he performed greatly for his fellow men in re-establishing the identity of the Dalit population in Kerala. So if we look at, in a way, this history of the Indian caste system, we find that it has undergone several stages and several experiments, and it has also exposed the lower castes to different ranges of experience, different experiences of pain and suffering, of, in a way, humiliation, sheer insult, and how there had also been anger, and revolt was also made possible by some anti-castes leaders, by many non-Brahmin leaders, and how, in a way, they laid the entire course of Indian history, especially related to the caste system and the practice of untouchability, in a way that we find in Dr. Ambedkar's speech at Mahad as well. I think Dr. Ambedkar's speech requires analysis, reading between the lines. So it might require many classes because it's a long speech, and it's also loaded with many allusions and references, and how Dr. Ambedkar alludes to the Roman system of conferatio, and how it was primarily responsible for the existence of a discriminatory system in Rome, despite many rights and privileges granted to the plebeians, how the patricians finally ruled the roost. And there were other references to Mahabharata, to the French National Assembly in different contexts. But Dr. Ambedkar has categorically explained the problem of untouchability to the fellow Satyagrahis in that famous historic speech, And he has also come up with a number of suggestions and how his prescription and strong advocacy of the practice of intermarriage finally turns out to be the ultimate solution to annihilate the caste system and establish equality and justice in the Indian society. So this is what I think that probably for today, this is what I had to present before my students. I know there are other interested listeners as well, and I feel that I have been able to address some of the issues, because this is a very big area, and more importantly, this is a greatly contested area, and also a very contentious, controversial area as well, because we have many arguments and counter arguments. We have many contesting philosophies. So we can't say that there can be one monolithic view of the entire discourse of Indian caste system vis-a-vis the practice of untouchability. But still, as it was primarily meant for the students of Midnapur College, I think that I have somehow been able to, in a way, summarize the basic tenets of the origin and development of the caste system, the development of untouchability, the practice of untouchability, the protest movements against the caste system, the protest movements against the practice of untouchability, first by the upper caste leaders and then by the non-Brahmin leaders, and how it culminates in the figure of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And for for my students, just to conclude, for my students of Midnapur College, I would like to give you another information that I know you are aware of that the original surname of Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar was not Ambedkar. No, he belongs to the Mahad community, an untouchable caste. No, and his original surname was Sakpal, S-A-K-P-A-L, Sakpal. Okay. And later, when his father got him admitted to the Elphinstone School in Mumbai, okay, he gave him one surname, okay, Amba Davekar, and that surname was from his native village, Amba Davi. And there was a Brahmin teacher, the Devrukh Brahmin teacher, Krishna Keshav Ambedkar, who gave his own surname to Baba Saheb Ambedkar, realizing the potential of the student that he was promised to shine in future life. He decided to give his own surname to Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar. So once again, look, there is also a very interesting development also in the use of this new surname as well. As if the new surname was a passport to his access to the main caste-based educational system. Because otherwise, if you read the autobiography of Dr. Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar, okay, Waiting for a Visa, title of his autobiography, if you read an excerpt, it is there in our edited volume, Listen to the Flames. You will be surprised to know that Dr. Ambedkar was not allowed to drink water, okay, from a container like other upper caste students. Okay, only the peon of the school could offer water to him. And on a day when the peon was absent, Dr. Ambedkar had to go without any water, had to remain thirsty throughout the day in the school. So that was the rigid casteist system in the Indian schools which existed, okay, in the first part of the 20th century. And Dr. Ambedkar had himself been a victim of this discriminatory casteist practices in his own life. Thank you. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you. No, every question, sir.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes. You're
I
perfectly
think
audible.
this is
Yeah.
one of the best season. Actually, today I got an opportunity to listen to you carefully because I was operating the slides. So before I never got an opportunity to listen to our resource persons. So thank you, sir. Now it's time for a question. So I invite questions from the participants if they do have any. So now request the participants to put the questions directly to you.
I see there are many questions. In fact,
Yeah,
they
sir.
they have
I think,
already.
yeah. So it's
Yes.
I think it's impossible to collect all
Ah,
these questions. So
yes.
it would be better if they ask you directly. So
Yes. I think that is better. Yes.
better. So in that case, they can turn on their audio
Mm.
and
Yes.
there was a one Kaushik Banerjee.
Kaushik
God,
Banerjee. Okay. Yes.
Kaushik, are you here?
What is your question, Kaushik? Mm.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Yes. Please tell me
Yes, sir.
your
Thank
question.
you, sir, for your lecture. Since I have heard your name only, since you have
Yes.
influenced many people, even they have changed their impel topic for even listening you. So I have also get the opportunity to listen to you. My question is, sir, what do you think on introducing graphic Dalit novel like Ramayana? It is included in UG syllabus. So
Yes.
is it not right to introduce like a graphic novel like Ramayana than
Ah.
any that traditional novel, at least in UG courses? Because it was at that time students are not that much comfortable with that
Mm.
vast novels. Is it not right to introduce graphic novel instead of traditional novels? So what is your take? Thank you.
Uh, no, yes. Thank you for your question, Kaushik. In fact, introduction of graphic Dalit novel, that is Ramayana, in the undergraduate course, I think it has also another philosophy behind the introduction of this graphic Dalit novel, because Dalit is now part of the broader cultural studies, and graphic novel is probably the new and emerging area of academic engagement, especially in connection with digital humanities, which we have been observing very fast coming up. So in a way, it is not only because of its Dalit character that Bhimayana is introduced in the syllabus. Bhimayana is introduced as a core text of cultural studies, okay, because it provides a ringside view on the subcultures. Because if we go by Dalit culture as a minor culture or a subculture, minor in the sense where Duluth and Gathari have defined what is a minor literature. Okay, if we go by that if Dalit literature is a specimen of minor literature, then this Bhimayana is also an example of a subculture or a minor culture. So it's part of cultural studies. And apart from that, graphic novel is also going to hold the future direction of literary attempts, literary practices. Okay, during, especially during the lockdown period, in the post-COVID world, if you look at the prospect of literary practices, you will find that graphic novels, animated graphic novels are going to be a major player, okay, in the global literary market. In fact, when the other day I have been talking about translation, okay, I have also been talking about e-translation. And when we are now acquainted with the notion of e-books, Okay, the translated volumes are also available as e-translations, and I suggested that in the online version of translated texts we should include graphics, we should include illustrations, we should include audio visual aids, okay, for a better understanding of the cultural nuance, of the cultural specificities. So from that point of view, I think that introduction of a graphic novel is always a very welcome step. Okay, why? Because even in the domain of digital humanities, a Dalit narrative is finding its presence. It is included. So Dalit has created such a huge impact upon the literary circle that it is now an inclusive discourse in the academia. Dalit has become an inclusive discourse in the academia.
So, Madam Shikhar, I have a
Yes.
question for you.
Yes.
So, there is a course going on with the national course about Dalit and of Pakistan. How is it different from the Ambedkarite discourse on Pakistan? And
The problem. Would you please repeat? Actually, I can't hear you properly.
Actually, sir, he is having problem in his audio.
Yes, yes. Actually, his voice breaks. I can't follow him. That's the problem. Yes.
So, I am from Jammu. I am an undergraduate student. My question is, there is a nationalist discourse going on about eradicating the Pakistan. On the other hand, there is an
So, sir, I think I request who is posing the question to write down the question in the comment box. It will be better then.
Yes, yes.
Your audio is not coming properly.
Please type the question
okay.
in the chat box. Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, sir. I am Mohan Duidas. Sir, first of all, I have been greatly enriched by your excellent, outstanding lecture. And I have a question.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you, Mohan. Yes. For your kind words. Yes. Tell me.
Sir, how Ambedkar was influenced by socialism as well as communism to establish equality in the society for all classes? So can you say something briefly?
No, actually, Dr. Ambedkar had already been introduced to the school of socialism and communism while he had been at London School of Economics. Okay. So while he had been pursuing his doctoral study there, he had already been introduced to a number of socialist thinkers, British socialist thinkers. And apart from that, when he moved to the Columbia University as well, he was inspired by the ideas of some great American revolutionary leaders, like John Dewey, who had left a lasting impression on him. Okay, and in a way, Dr. Ambedkar in India was also greatly mentored by the philosophy of Jyotiba Rao Phule and Savitribai Phule. The work which they began with the untouchables was a true inspiration for Dr. Ambedkar. So Dr. Ambedkar had already been introduced to the dominant ideas of socialism and communism in America as well as in the United Kingdom. So that probably helped him to shape his own ideas about the nature of social revolution. About the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And definitely he was inspired by the ideals of French Revolution. Definitely. Okay, Mohan, yes.
Hello, sir. This is Shuma. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you for the immense informative lecture. Sir, you have projected the emergence of Renaissance process as the reform movement. But writers like Titi Bhattacharya or Shekhar Bandopadhyay severely criticized the Renaissance process and claimed that it was immensely limited between the handful of Bhadraloks and who were predominantly the upper caste Hindus, most privileged Hindus. And not only that, Bandopadhyay also noticed lower caste mobilization against the Bhadralok class during the 19th century Bengal. So, sir, what do you think that how much helpful the Renaissance process was to annihilate the class system?
No, this is a very good question. But once again, this is, I have already mentioned that this is a highly debatable area. Because the 19th century Bengal Renaissance had been interpreted in various ways by various historians. Definitely, I have been doing a kind of survey first by the upper caste people who participated and in a way pioneered the Renaissance in Bengal. And then I have discussed the people, the leaders from the lower castes who had thought about their own people. But in a way, if you look at the history of Renaissance in Bengal in the 19th century, you will find that there had been certain movement and there had been certain very important steps taken by the social reformers to abolish certain very evil practices of Hinduism. For example, the abolition of sati. If you look at the reform movement, abolition of sati, you have to accept that this was definitely a major step to overcome certain evil systems of Hinduism. Say, for example, widow remarriage. If you look at this reformist movement, you have to accept that this was definitely beneficial and urgent in the context of then society, which completely oppressed and denied any human rights to the widows, especially the Hindu Brahmin widows. Similarly, if you look at, I have referred to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa. If you look at, the interactions of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the Kathamrita, and the different characters of Kathamrita, and if you look at, Sri Ramakrishna's close dialogue with, Mathur Babu, Rani Rashmoni, and many other people, from, very low stratum of life. If you look at the entire biography of Sri Ramakrishna, you will find that many of his teachings and practices were major steps to do away with the rigid caste-based discriminatory practices of Hinduism. If you look at the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, if you look at many movements of Swami Vivekananda and his interactions with people from different religions and also from different strata of Hindu society, you will find that he was completely a kind of idol breaker. You will find that there was definitely a kind of radical reformist zeal that was in Swami Vivekananda. Similarly, there had been many such reformist leaders who were able to change the ruling, repressive, casteist, hegemonic practices of Brahminism, who were at least able to either change its direction, or initiate a new practice, or in a way when they couldn't tackle with it, they outrightly attacked it. If you look at some of the quotations of Swami Vivekananda, you will find at one point of time he says regarding the excesses of Vaishnavism, okay, and how there was hypocrisy in the practice of religion. He says that wherever you see such hypocritical people, you would simply thrash them out. Okay, thrash them out. So, it is not about, ushering in a paradigm shift in the caste-based equations of Hindu society by one particular individual. But Renaissance as a whole contributed to the process of the changing mindset of especially the upper caste. Okay. And you would find that many upper caste reformist leaders, starting from Ram Mohan up to Vidyasagar, you will find that all of them were against the practice of untouchability, the practice of many other evil systems. Any more question?
There was Riyanka Sharma. She has just put the question in the comment box. She was trying to, I think, she was trying to reach you.
Riyanka. Yeah.
Riyanka.
Yes, Riyanka Sharma. Sir, in your views, who are Dalits? Not in my views. Actually, Dr. Ambedkar has categorically stated in his famous speech at Mahad, he has categorically stated that Dalits are people who are outside the fourfold structure of Hindu caste system, that is Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. And Dr. Ambedkar coined the term to describe Dalits, and he said that they are Ati Shudras. If you read that speech, you will find recurrence of this word Ati Shudra. So Dalits are the untouchable castes. So Dalits are not Shudras, strictly speaking, because Shudras are also included in the fourfold structure of Hinduism. But Dalits are beyond that. And he has also used another word for that, Panchamas. Panchamas, they are the fifth Varna. They are outside Chaturvarna. So Dalits are excluded, untouchable, and people with the so-called ignoble professions in society. People like scavengers, people who are engaged in the so-called low professions in society. They are Dalits, according to Dr. Ambedkar. But once again, Dalit, ontologically, Dalit definitely refers to the untouchables. But if you look at the word Dalit metaphorically, if you look at the word Dalit, as an ideological term, you have to refer to the long interview between Sharan Kumar Limbale and Arjun Dangle in the appendix of that famous book by Limbale, translated into English as Towards an Aesthetic of Dalit Literature. So if you follow the appendix in that conversation, we find that Limbale says that ideologically, we would also include the Adivasis, the nomadic tribes, and all other marginalized and excluded communities under the broad umbrella of Dalit. So Dalit, from that point of view, is also an empowering term. Dalit is also an inclusive term, inclusive for all the disempowered people of the world. In fact, I would also like to refer to the epilogue of another very important novel by Mahashweta Devi, translated into English as Choti Munda and his Arrow. If you look at the epilogue of that novel written by Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, yes, in that epilogue, the last sentence of Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak is what? That Birsa Munda, the tribal leader of the Ulgulan, the Mundari revolt, Birsa Munda can be described as a Dalit. Spivak writes there, Birsa Munda can be described as a Dalit. So there are two approaches to describing who are Dalits. Two approaches. One is the ontological approach, another one is the ideological approach. Yes. Any more questions?
So I think, sir, there is no more questions. So we can wind up the session by giving now request our student Davasmita Maiti to offer a formal vote of thanks to sir. Davasmita.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, perfectly audible. Yes.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. I'm Devashmita Maiti, student of 6th semester, Midnapur College. First of all, I would like to thank on behalf of our department, Professor Indranil Acharya, Assistant Professor of English with Dasagar University, whose enlightened lecture on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the idea of untouchability in Indian society, has greatly enriched us. We are really grateful, sir, and feel fortunate to have you in our session. It was pleasure to hear you, and I would like to convey my deep regards to our honorable principal, Sir Dr. Gopal Chandra Bera, whose copious permission has enabled the beautiful session. I would also like to thank our respected HOD, Professor Tanmoy Kundu sir, for organizing this online lecture series and uniting all the fellow students, teachers, scholars in this adverse situation. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all the participants across the country who have joined this session and made it a success. Well, that's all. Thank you again. Have a nice day, sir.
It's great to have the two participants from Sri Lanka. So
okay, great.
So they are my friends. They just logged in, so they are there.
Okay. Really
Thank you,
nice.
sir. Yes, sir.
We have two international participants.
Yeah,
That's
sir.
great. Great.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanmoy. Thank you. It had been a nice experience. Thank you.
Okay, sir.